Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to the Education USA Thursday event. We are very delighted to host Professor Bolton from Stanford University, who will be talking to you about the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program. But before I hand over to Dr. Bolton, I would just like to give you a short introduction to Education USA and the US India Educational Foundation, and then I will, without any delay, hand it over to Dr. Bolton to talk about the Scholars Program. So just quickly to let you know that Education USA is a US Department of State funded program, so which means we are your official source of information on US higher education, right? We are funded by the Bureau of Education and Cultural Affairs under the Department of State, and we are actually a global network of 400 plus advising centers in about 170 countries around the world. In India, we have 7 Education USA centers. 5 of these are hosted by the US India Educational Foundation, and these are in the cities of Delhi, Kolkata, Mumbai, Hyderabad, and Chennai. And we have 2 independent Education USA centers in the cities of Ahmedabad and Bangalore as well. So if you need any information on studying in the US, be it for an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a PhD, or even a postdoc, please reach out to the nearest Education USA center and connect with the advisors to give you information on how you can apply for these programs in the US. Now, talking about US India Education Foundation, which hosts the Education USA program in India, we were established in the year 1950 following the signing of a treaty between the Government of India and the Government of the United States. And the purpose of setting up this organization was to promote mutual understanding through education and cultural exchange programs between citizens of both countries. And we do this through our 2 programs. One is called the Fulbright and the Fulbright Nehru Fellowship Program, and the second one is called the Education USA Program, for which I am one of the Education USA advisors here in Chennai. Just a quick introduction, we have very recently launched the Education USA India mobile application. Please do download it. It is free for download, and it is available both on the Android and the iOS platforms. It's your first step to getting information about studying in the US. It doesn't take too much space on your phone as well, so do download. And if you have any questions, we have a chat bot as well that you can type your questions into, and it will go to the nearest Education USA center, and where an advisor will reply to you in a couple of days once you've posted your question on the mobile app. So that's a great way also to contact us. For those of you who are extremely mobile friendly, please do download the mobile application. Remember, it's the Education USA India mobile app. Just quick details on how to contact us and few resources that are free for use for students. The first is our Facebook page, Education USA India. Please do follow it. We regularly post information about scholarships, fellowships, new programs or majors that are being introduced by US universities. So that's a great place to get all that information. We also post articles of relevance that would be very useful for international students. So please do look at our Facebook page. We also have a YouTube page called Education USA India. The resources are completely free for all students. We have a video for every step of the application process. You're figuring out how to shortlist universities, how to write that SOP that everybody is worrying about, or the essay if you're an undergraduate student, right? How to put together your proof of finances, right? So there is a video available for pretty much every step of the application process. So do note that's again a great place for you to go and check out those videos. Please look at our official websites. educationusa.state.gov is the official website for the Education USA program. The 5 steps to the US study are explained in great detail for the students going for associates, bachelor's, as well as graduate degree programs. So please have a look at the 5 steps to US study for undergraduate or graduate education, depending on what you're applying for. And of course, the US India Educational Foundation website, which is usief.org.in. The 5 centers, Education USA centers that come under the umbrella of the USIEF organization, we publish our monthly calendar on the homepage of this particular website. This calendar will tell you what are our upcoming events, whether we are hosting an information session at the American Center like in Chennai here, or are we hosting a webinar, which is an online event that we do 2 Saturdays in a month. We host a webinar. The information about the webinar and the link for joining that webinar will also be provided. Any upcoming events, fairs, alumni fairs, or education fairs, all that information is usually provided in our monthly calendar. So please do check the usief.org.in website. And of course, like I said, 2 Saturdays in a month we host a webinar. Information about the webinar is on the calendar, and that's the link for our webinar space where we host the webinars. And of course, don't forget our Education USA India mobile application. For those of you in the region, in South India, especially in the states of Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Puducherry, as well as in the Union Territories of Andamans and Nicobar Islands and Lakshadweep. Our office is your nearest Education USA center. We provide information to students in this region. This is our address. We are located in the US Consulate in Chennai. You may contact us via phone. We have a WhatsApp number that you can message. We will respond to you even over WhatsApp. And of course, you may email us on chennai@educationusa.org. We are available to meet students Monday through Friday, 9:30 to 4:30. Students are required to bring a government-issued original valid photo ID card if they are entering this building. But do call us before you come so we can give you all these instructions, right? So with that brief introduction, I'm now going to hand it over to Dr. Bolton to talk about the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program at Stanford University. Welcome to Chennai, and thank you for joining us this afternoon.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for arranging the session, and thanks to all of you for making time. Thanks to all of you for making time to come learn more about the Knight-Hennessy Scholars. In my opinion, this is the most exciting new initiative at Stanford University, and I'm delighted to get to share some insights with you about the program. So, as we get started, let me just cover kind of the basics here. When you think of the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program, I know a lot of people think first about the scholarship. That's not the right way to think about it. This is primarily a community, right? It's a community of graduate students from all around the world and all different programs at Stanford who come together because you have an interest in making a difference in the world once you've graduated. So we think of Knight-Hennessy Scholars as roughly 4 to 8 hours a week that will run in parallel to your graduate program. A series of experiential activities, leadership development activities that we think will help prepare you to have a bigger impact in the world once you've graduated. And of course, along with that does come substantial funding. So if you're selected as a scholar, you receive full funding for any graduate degree at Stanford. The first 3 years of whatever degree you pursue would be funded by the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program. So that means anything other than a medical degree or a PhD would be fully funded by the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program. For the other degrees that are longer, MD or PhD, then the academic programs fund the remaining years to whatever the standard is for that program, right? So for example, the medical school is 5 years, that's normal. Some PhD programs are 4, some take 6. So whatever's the standard for that program, the additional years of funding would come from your graduate program. But the point is, there is full funding for scholars. A quick point on Knight and Hennessy. Who are they? So the Knight of Knight-Hennessy is Phil Knight. He's a Stanford alumnus and the founder of Nike. He actually wrote the business plan for Nike as a second-year MBA student at Stanford, and he provided the lead financial gift for the program. But as I look around, I'm not seeing any Nike shoes here, so I'm not going to tell Phil that though. But he is really excited about the chance to help Stanford really change the world, and this program is one that he really cares deeply about. So he provided the lead financial gift. The Hennessy of Knight-Hennessy is John Hennessy. John was the president of Stanford for about 16 years. He is the chairman of Alphabet, that's the parent company of Google. And probably most important for all of you, if you have a mobile phone or a laptop or a tablet, 99% of those devices in the world run on the computer architecture that John Hennessy developed. So he's really a visionary, and he's also the faculty director of our Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program. So you're eligible to apply to the Knight-Hennessy Scholars in your final year of study through 5 years after you receive your degree. So that means, for example, in this year, 2019, you're eligible as long as you received your degree in 2014 or later. As Aparna said, Stanford does not accept a 3-year undergraduate degree, so you are required to earn a master's degree. You can appeal that with your individual graduate program. The business school will sometimes make an exception, but most other programs don't. So whenever you reach the point that you're eligible to apply to Stanford, that's when your eligibility window would start. So if that master's degree you earned in 2014, you'd still be eligible to apply this year. Okay? So those are the basics. So I want to tell you a little bit about Stanford at the graduate level. Just because the strengths of the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program are built on the strengths of Stanford University. Then tell you about the program itself. It's very much a startup, right? A brand new program, and that's really exciting for us. And then I'll tell you about the admission process, what we look for, where we find those things, and get into some questions. So this is the main entrance to campus, Palm Drive. One of my favorite views. This is actually my commute every day, kind of walking up Palm Drive. Stanford has 7 different schools, 7 different faculties on one campus. I'm always curious who's in the audience, so I just want to get a quick show of hands. How many of you are thinking about graduate study, postgraduate study in medicine? Okay, so if we get sick, we're all coming to you. What about law? Okay. Anyone thinking about business? Okay, so that rounds out our professional schools. Is anyone thinking about earth sciences, energy, sustainability? Okay. Engineering? Okay. How about education? Okay. Excellent. Yeah. And then that leaves the heart of the university. Those are the humanities, the sciences, the social sciences, the arts. Okay. Anybody not raise your hand? Okay, because that's all we do. What are you thinking about? Oh, economics is social sciences. Yeah, so, okay, good. We don't offer programs in, for example, dentistry, right? We often get questions like that. We don't have a public health degree, right? So just be sure that you've done some research on kind of what the offerings are at Stanford. But regardless of when you raised your hand, regardless of what you're thinking about pursuing at Stanford, the goal of a graduate education is building depth in a field. You want to deepen and advance your understanding of that area. For a long time, we felt like that was enough. If you came to Stanford, you pursued a PhD in political science, you pursued an MBA, you're really well equipped to go out and have an impact in the world. But I think what we've seen, especially for your generation, is that the challenges that are facing your generation are so broad. You think about something like income inequality, or peace and security, or the health of our planet. Certainly in the US, the health of our political institutions. These are issues that don't fit neatly into these artificial university departments that we've created. And so we always talk at Stanford about building T-shaped students. Students who, yes, have that expertise in an area, but the top bar of that T, who can make connections, ask questions, collaborate with others who are experts in fields different from your own. One of the hallmarks of Stanford University is that the university itself is really porous. So you might be studying education or medicine, but you can take classes in law or history. And so once you're a graduate student at Stanford, we want you to take advantage of all the resources across the university. That's where some of the best ideas emerge, at the intersection of these disciplines. Third point on Stanford. When you think of Stanford, you probably think of Silicon Valley. I always have to remind people, Stanford was there first, right? So the Valley grew up around us, but we do have a common DNA, a common heritage. There's a comfort with risk-taking, comfort with ambiguity, comfort with change. So we know a lot about the conditions that allow innovation to flourish, but we also believe in teaching innovation directly. And we do this through our design school, design thinking principles at Stanford, which is rooted in anthropology. It's trying to understand the person who would use your product or your service. And it's really different from solving a problem. It's actually rooted in empathy, trying to understand how you could solve a challenge that they're facing. And then using iteration, rapid prototyping to improve those products along the way. So just 3 quick points on Stanford. Now on the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Experience, as I mentioned, we are very much a startup. So if the idea of helping to build a program that will be around as long as Stanford is around is exciting to you, then you should think about this opportunity. Our first cohort of 50 scholars joined us in September of last year. Our second cohort will be about 70 scholars. They'll join us in September of this year. We're aiming for a group between 80 and 90 scholars to join in 2020, so that's the group applying this year. And then our long-term goal is 100 scholars a year. There are no quotas, no targets, no allocations. That's by country, by citizenship, by field of study, by gender. There's nothing like that. So really the entire process is focused person by person, not group by group. But our expectation is that in the long term, certainly the majority of our Knight-Hennessy scholars will be international students. Just looking at where talent is distributed around the world. And I think one of the major hurdles to international students studying in the US is the financial piece, and we've taken that away. So our hope is certainly that in the long term, we'll have a really robust group of international students. It's one of the major teaching tools of the program. So The first thing we said as we launched the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program is that every community needs a home. And so we built a facility for the Knight-Hennessy Scholars. It's called Denning House. It's called a house, but it is not a residence. It's not a hostel. So it's a home away from home. Most graduate students at Stanford do live on campus. We actually have about 2,400 more graduate beds that'll open in September of 2020. So Denning House is supposed to feel like a tree house in the woods. It's a respite, a place of calm, kind of away from the hectic academic pace that you're pursuing in your courses. First floor, meeting rooms, conference rooms. The second floor is really where the scholars hang out, right? The first place when you walk up the stairs, you'll always see scholars right here along the window, just kind of enjoying the sun. And they have a lovely den upstairs where somebody will grab a nap between classes. There's a refrigerator that's fully stocked with cold brew coffee, tea, everything that you need to stay fueled up and ready to go as busy graduate students. And then we do all of the activities for the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program at Denning House. As I mentioned before, the program is primarily a community, and so the scholars have organized a series of events throughout the year to help foster those relationships. We kicked off with a dinner at the farm on the Stanford campus. There's a farm where we grow a lot of the fruits and vegetables that we eat in the residence halls at Stanford, so we kicked off with the dinner there. And then over Halloween in the US, the scholars had their own themed night at the museum where they brought graduate students from all around campus into Denning House for a great night. And then the US has a wonderful tradition called Thanksgiving, where every year you take one day to reflect, to be grateful for the things that you have to celebrate in your life. And the scholars organize their own Friendsgiving dinner to celebrate each other and the opportunities they've had. So we think about skills that will be important for you, whether you become an educator or an entrepreneur, a physician, or a university faculty member, right? A couple of examples are speaking and listening. So on the speaking side, we bring in faculty from our Department of Drama. That's Lisa Rowland. I don't know if that'll show. Yeah, no. That's Lisa Rowland. She and Dan Klein are faculty members in drama who specialize in improvisational storytelling. And so the scholars every week come over to Denning House and work in a small group of 6 or 8 scholars and practice storytelling. Right? Our view is that leadership is an art, and so you get better at it through practice, not by reading about other leaders, but by getting the chance to practice these skills yourselves. And so we have the same group of scholars sitting around the table every week, interdisciplinary group, and you're getting the chance to practice giving feedback to your fellow scholars about their stories, and then to refine your own, right? Your personal stories, your research, just building those skills more broadly. Now, we think that a lot of leaders are really good at speaking, but not so good at listening. I'm not thinking of the President of the United States, no. But we want our scholars to be really good at listening. And so we've brought in a group at Stanford, it's called the St. Lawrence String Quartet, to work with the scholars on listening to music as a way of improving your active listening skills. This is Rob Capello. He's a musician in the US who has a show on National Public Radio. He comes in to work with the scholars on kind of listening for the So listening for the pauses in music and then translating that into listening for pauses in conversations, what's not being said as you're actively engaging. We offer a seminar series. In our first year, we offered 1 each quarter. For our upcoming year, we'll have 3 seminars each quarter. Up here, you see a few snippets of our first quarter series. The first quarter was focused on broadening your exposure to faculty members at Stanford. Then we moved into a deeper session on storytelling, great stories throughout history, led by an underwater archaeologist we brought in from University of Louisville. And then in the spring quarter, we brought in a great Stanford alumna who's a faculty member at London School of Economics, and she led a workshop with the scholars on ethics, real-world ethics on the edge, things like Sophia, the artificial intelligent robot, and some of the ethical challenges of things like that. In the first quarter, we had 5 faculty from different disciplines come in to share their insights with the group. So at the bottom left is Mike McFall. Mike here was the U.S. ambassador to Russia under President Obama, and he is a professor of political science and did an amazing talk for us on U.S. foreign policy, especially that bridging that gap between academia and real-world issues. This is Emma Brunskill. Emma is a professor of computer science, one of Stanford's leading faculty members in machine learning and artificial intelligence. And this is probably my favorite conversation of the entire year. Because talking about artificial intelligence, you had all these scholars thinking about the issue from different perspectives, different lenses. And so the lawyers were thinking about bias. You know, how is bias built into the system? If it's running in the background, who's actually able to identify these disparate outcomes? Our medical students were thinking about patient care, patient diagnoses, and how this could be useful. The teachers were rethinking the education system. If you know there's a baseline of artificial intelligence, how would you change the way that you teach kindergarten through secondary school students? Our business students, to their credit, just focused on the market opportunities. And then the policy students thinking about employment, right? How would you ensure that people whose jobs have moved away because of artificial intelligence are retrained? This is Al Roth. Al's an economist at Stanford, a Nobel Prize winning economist actually. And he spoke with us about markets, but specifically markets that you cannot make with supply and demand. So the market for exchanging organs, for example. And he actually created the market for kidney exchange in the US and spoke with us about the ethical dilemmas there and how he was able to do that. We also heard from the dean of the law school at Stanford about immigration and about privacy rights, two issues that will be central in the law for your generation. And from a faculty member in biology, Professor Porteous, who spoke with us about CRISPR, this ability to edit DNA, and some of the ethical implications and the real-world implications that are coming very quickly from that technology. About once a month, we do bring in an outside speaker to give you a chance to learn from someone who's been through times of crisis, times of challenge. We kicked off that series on the left-hand side with George Shultz. George Shultz was Secretary of State, Secretary of Labor, and Secretary of Treasury in the United States, going back to well before I think the US-India Education Foundation was even founded, right? And so speaking with him is like living history and an amazing understanding of all the alliances that underpin the world we live in today. More recently, we heard from Susan Wojcicki, the CEO of YouTube, about being a woman leading a tech company in the Valley, but also just the technical challenges they face as they try to promote freedom of speech, freedom of expression around the world, but also not glamorizing or promoting spectacles, shootings, and things like that. We had Andrew Luck. If you follow U.S. football, and I know most of you probably don't, Andrew Luck is the quarterback of the Indianapolis Colts and came in and spoke with us about leadership. Michelle Bachelet, the former president of Chile, now the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, spoke with the scholars about her work. She's been spending a lot of time in Venezuela given the crisis there. Fareed Zakaria came in. He's a host of a show on CNN called Global Public Square, did a breakfast, about 10 or 12 scholars, just asking him questions about the defining experiences in his life and how those have shaped who he is today. So a great opportunity to, I think, to learn from people who are in positions of influence. And what I heard from the scholars over and over was that they realized these leaders are not very different from them. And that was very inspiring to them in a way, but also a little scary, because they realized then that there's nothing stopping them from trying to pursue their own potential, and they felt a deeper sense of responsibility to go out and do that. On the theme of broadening, every quarter the scholars have an opportunity to read one book in common, and then we bring in the author for a discussion of that book. We kicked off Phil Knight, the co-founder of the program, and discussed his book, Shoe Dog. This is Lucy Calamithi. She's a physician at Stanford. Her late husband, Paul, wrote a book called When Breath Becomes Air. If you haven't read it, I would highly recommend it. I also recommend Shoe Dog. But Paul Calamithi's book is really about love and loss and the process of becoming a physician, and was one of the deepest conversations that I think we've had among the scholars this year. Allison Hobbs, professor of history, launched her book on the history of racial passing in the US. More recently, Lolita Tatamy, who's a wonderful author, spoke about the process of becoming an author and the frustrations she faced along the way. The arts are physically built into Denning House, but also built into our program. We know not a lot of our students have exposure to the arts as you grow up or in your studies, and we think it's a way to stimulate creativity, to help you think more broadly, to help you open your mind to new possibilities. And so the first thing you see as you walk up to Denning House is a beautiful bronze sculpture about 3 meters tall out front. And this is the artist, Ursula von Reitingsbarg. So every time we commission a piece for Denning House, the author comes, the artist comes to spend some time in residence with the scholars. And these conversations are wide-ranging. I remember Ursula spoke a lot about marriage, about choices that you make in life, not as much about art, but just about living as a human on the planet that we all share. This is Ken Burns, documentary filmmaker, who spoke about the things that drive him to pursue topics in such depth. And then we want our scholars to head away from campus as a way of building community and also having some social impact. So a couple of times a year, the scholars head down to a retreat. Our first one was down on the beach in Carmel, about 90 minutes south of Stanford. Our second one was in the foothills in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And each time they're focused on a specific social challenge. So for the first quarter, we brought in adolescents, 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, and they talked with the scholars about technology, their screen addictions, their social media overuse, how that was affecting them in terms of emotional well-being, and then the scholars worked over the weekend using design thinking principles to come up with ways to take the same technologies and convert them to be solutions to those problems. Our second hackathon, kind of impactathon, was a follow-on of a trip that the cohort took to Costa Rica in the spring. And we had 5 different threads we identified from that trip that they were able to work on when they came back. So the scholars have a chance to do at least one international trip and at least one domestic trip. The international trip, again, our first one is here, Costa Rica over spring break of this year. The scholars went down led by Bill Durham, an amazing anthropologist at Stanford who's been going there for about 35 or 40 years. Costa Rica is the first carbon neutral country in the world. And so they understood how the country was able to make that kind of decision, spent time with families running ecotourism businesses, understood the challenges they're facing about things like palm oil, a much more lucrative crop, but not as environmentally sustainable. And then again, upon returning from that trip, they had 5 different kind of issues that identified that they're continuing to work on. Our second trip, we think, will be more of a global leaders whirlwind, trying to see leaders here in India, in Singapore, in Russia, Germany, and the UK over the course of spring break. And we'd like to have someone like Fareed Zakaria, Christian Amanpour, Katie Couric, like someone of that stature to come along with the scholars on the trip, not as a reporter, but as someone to help them think through how to prepare questions for these world leaders and how to ask those questions the right way. Within the US, we're thinking about our first trip focused on civil rights. So traveling through some of the major civil rights milestones in the US, Birmingham, Selma, Montgomery, Alabama, and kind of recreating the freedom rides, the bus rides of the 1960s to Washington, D.C., and we'd have another social impact challenge at that point. And then a second trip in the U.S. focused on the arts, getting through not just Los Angeles and New York, but also other places that have thriving modern art scenes, you know, Miami or Houston or Minneapolis, something like that. So.
Sorry, to interrupt, Dr. Bolton. Some of the
Yeah.
students at the back aren't able to hear you, so would you speak a little louder?
I've done about 20 sessions this week. I barely have a voice, but I will tell those students there are seats up front. So,
Sorry about that.
yeah, no worries. Sorry for coughing to the folks who are listening in the live stream. If you can't hear me at some point, raise your hand and I will try to yell. But again, I see seats that are closer. Yeah, no, of course. Third section, what do we look for as we select our scholars? So remember, we are not an academic program. We are a community, we are a leadership platform, and so you have to do 2 separate applications. I'll talk more about that. But when we're looking for Knight-Hennessy scholars, we know that the academic programs are the experts on what makes you a great student in that program. So we're looking at what makes you a terrific scholar, what will help to provide that impact that you have once you graduate. If Phil Knight were here, his 3 qualities would be outthink, outwork, outcare. The way we would express them in a little more depth is, number 1, independence of thought. So we really look for students who come to Stanford full of original ideas. with a genuine sense of curiosity, students who are not waiting to be told what to do by a faculty member, but who have ideas that you want to pursue, and you're going to take advantage of the resources at Stanford to do that. Students who have a real willingness to teach your fellow students and to learn from the people around you at Stanford. We always think about students who might bring a dissenting voice in a classroom, a contrarian point of view in a discussion, a non-consensus thinker who will challenge assumptions of all the students, all the faculty at Stanford, and help us question some of the things we might have taken for granted. But who can do that in a way that's agreeable. So number one there. Number two, we think about scholars who have purposeful leadership. Two elements there, right? That sense of purpose, almost a sense of calling, a sense of mission, something that you are willing to dedicate your time, your energy toward for a long time after you graduate from Stanford. The leadership piece, I think, is about having a sense of ambition, but ambition for others as opposed to ambition for self. We think of leadership as being deeply entwined with service, right? The best leaders truly are servants to the people in the organizations, the societies that we all share and serve. And so we look for students who come to Stanford with those big dreams, right? You don't change the world through low ambition. But if you have those kinds of aspirations, then you also need a sense of resilience, a sense of persistence, determination. In the US, we talk about grit, because you're going to encounter obstacles. You're going to encounter failures along the way, and you'll have to pick yourself up and try again. You'll have to adapt and try different things. So that's really the second element. The final piece, as we select our scholars, we always want students who are humble and kind, and will help us to build a thriving community where all of the scholars belong. So a community that is inclusive, but also where students hold each other accountable to be the best versions of yourselves. And we think of this as a community not just for the 2 years or 8 years that you're at Stanford, but a lifelong community where you'll be drawing on these relationships and interests for years after you graduate. So then, as I mentioned before, you might imagine the qualities that I just mentioned are not necessarily the same things that would make you a great PhD student in chemical engineering, or that would make you a terrific master's student in policy. And so as a result, there are two different applications. There is one for your graduate program, and that's focused on what makes you a terrific applicant for that program. There's a second application for the Knight-Hennessy scholars, and that's focused on what makes you a great scholar. There certainly may be overlap between those two applications. That's normal. So it's not something that you need to concern yourself with, as long as you're preparing applications that help show your strengths for each of those individual programs. The timeline is really confusing. I apologize for that. But there's much more detail on our website and in the application itself. For example, for the MBA program, I know we had quite a few hands that went up for the MBA. You must apply in the first application round, that is September 12th. For the School of Education, they've set a priority deadline for Knight-Hennessy scholars, so you have to apply by November 14th. For the law school, they say November 22nd, again a priority deadline for Knight-Hennessy scholars. The absolute latest you would ever apply for a graduate program is December 10th, but most of them are due a little bit before that. So just check the websites carefully. The Knight-Hennessy Scholars application will be due October 10th, and is due October 10th regardless of the degree program to which you have applied. So let me tell you what's in the Knight-Hennessy application. We start with biographical and demographic information. Aparna may have talked about this earlier, but I apologize if you've never applied to a school in the United States before. We ask for a lot of information. It may feel really intrusive, but it's because we practice holistic admission. That means we're interested not just in your academic ability, but in the values that you bring to the community and how you'll take advantage of the resources, how you'll shape Stanford and how Stanford will shape you. And so we ask you a lot of information. Tell us about your parents. Are you the first person in your family to go to college, or is this a tradition that's existed in your family before? We ask about how you funded your time in undergraduate institutions. Were you working to pay for college? Did you have scholarships for the time you were there? So all those sorts of data points help us to get some context on how you've developed and grown, what kinds of opportunities you've had, and how you took advantage of those. There is no application fee for the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program, but there is generally an application fee for your department. So just be sure to pay attention to that. We ask for a one-page resume, which means you cannot list everything you've ever done on a one-page resume, right? So you have to curate a set of experiences and interests, personal, academic, professional. But this is not a resume that stands on its own. It's a way to frame the information that we're reviewing in the application itself. So as you think about the resume, think of this as the very first thing someone is looking at when they review your application. How would you like to set context of what they're going to be looking at later on? Then we get to transcripts. You need to provide transcripts of your undergraduate performance and graduate performance if you've gone to postgraduate school. We at the Knight-Hennessy Scholars will not go course by course, grade by grade. We look more broadly for trends and performance. The academic programs, however, will go through your transcript and look at each particular course and how that helps to prepare you for study in that field. We don't need an official transcript for the Knight-Hennessy Scholars. In addition, there's actually an Excel spreadsheet in the application where you could just enter the courses you took and the marks you received if that's easier for you. So the official transcripts come to the academic programs, but in most cases, not until after you're admitted to that program. Then Stanford has differing policies based on the graduate program about testing. So the Knight-Hennessy Scholars will follow the guidance of your graduate program. For example, in the professional schools, this is really simple. The business school requires the GMAT or GRE. There's no exception to that. The law school requires the LSAT for JD applicants. The medical school requires the MCAT for MD students. So those are tests you must take for those graduate programs, and you also must submit those to the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program. But the tests are not due by the Knight-Hennessy deadline. They're due by your department's deadline. So for example, if your graduate program application is not due until December 10th, you don't need the test scores when you apply to the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program in October. But for the MBA students, since your application is due September 12th, all of you already have to have standardized test scores, and so you will provide those in your Knight-Hennessy application. For any of the academic programs at Stanford, that is education, earth sciences, engineering, humanities and sciences, you have to check department by department. Some Stanford departments require the GRE. Some Stanford departments do not accept it at all, and others make it optional or recommended. So check the policy of the department. Whatever you do for that department, you'll also do for Knight-Hennessy Scholars. Then there's an English proficiency requirement. If you have a degree from a university at which English is the sole and official language of instruction, you do not need an English test. It's not based on citizenship, it's not based on work experience or location, it's simply based on the language of instruction at your undergraduate or postgraduate institution. If you don't have that, then you have to take a test. All Stanford departments except the TOEFL, the test of English as a foreign language, minimum score of 100 on the internet-based test or 600 on the paper-based test. And then the MBA program, but only the MBA program, will also accept the IELTS and the PTE with a minimum score of band 7 overall for the IELTS and a minimum score of 68 for the Pearson test of English. Okay, but that's only for the MBA program. Anything else at Stanford, you have to take the TOEFL. And again, I apologize for there being so many different policies. Some departments require the TOEFL within 18 months. Some departments accept it within 24 months. So whatever, again, you're doing for your department, you also do for Knight-Hennessy Scholars. Just read those requirements carefully. Then we get to the things we actually spend the most time on in the admission process. The things I've talked about before, the test scores, the transcripts, the application, a lot of that's data, right? And we get all this context to understand you better from stories. Stories about you that other people tell us, those are your recommendations. Stories about you that you share with us, and those come elsewhere in the application. So for the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program, we ask for 2 recommendation letters. You have lots of flexibility here, so you could pick academic references, you could pick professional references if you're working. I know we had a question earlier about work experience. About 70 to 75% of the Knight-Hennessy scholars have work experience, on average about 1.8 years. That's not a preference or policy of Knight-Hennessy. It's exactly as Aparna said. Different departments have different norms. So for doctoral programs, most of the students will go straight from undergrad. The professional schools are the other extreme. Right? 99% of MBA students have work experience, about 65% of law students, and about half of the medical doctors. And so our cohort simply reflects that mix of graduate students across the university, but be sure to check for your specific program. And again, even within the doctoral programs, there are exceptions. Anthropology, psychology, education, it's very common for students to have 4 or 5 years of experience, possibly more at the time they apply to those programs, because they have such high expectations around research exposure. So just check carefully with the individual departments. As you choose your recommenders, you don't have to worry about the person's title or the person's stature in their field. You do have to worry about what they're going to say about you, right? You want to pick people who know you really well, who like you, because they've got to tell us great anecdotes and evidence and examples that will help to bring you to life through this letter. What makes a letter strong is the details. You know, we have so many parts of your application to understand what you've done. Here in the recommendations, we start to get a sense of the impact you've had on others, on people around you. So look at the Knight-Hennessy Scholars application. We'll ask your recommenders questions like, what has this applicant done that benefited others? Tell us about a piece of constructive feedback you've given to the applicant and how the applicant responded to that feedback. Right? So if you pick an academic reference, it has to be a faculty member who knows you well. Someone maybe you spent time with outside the classroom, a course assistant, a research assistant, something like that. But don't forget, you also have recommendation letters for your graduate program, typically between 3 and 8 letters for an academic program. And so is it okay to have the same person write for Knight-Hennessy Scholars and the graduate program? Absolutely, that's fine. But remember, we're asking for different things because the programs are focused on different criteria. So even if it's the same person, you don't simply want to have them submit the same letter to the 2 different programs. Spend some time with your recommenders. The best investment you can make, take them out for tea or for coffee and talk through your experiences. Think of that conversation as a chance to get feedback from someone whose opinion you value, someone who wants to see you succeed. And the byproduct of that conversation will be the letter that the recommender submits. You do not want to draft the letter yourself. We are not looking for another essay, right? Recommenders see things in you that you can't see in yourself. And so that's the reason that we're asking them to provide their input. So steer away from recommenders who are asking you to do the initial draft for them. Although it's absolutely fine to talk about examples, issues that you think may be relevant to cover in the letter itself. Then we get to essays, a peculiarity of the U.S. higher education system. So I'll remind you first, the word essay comes from French, and it means to try. Not to perfect, but to try. And so what we want you to do in your essay is to think of this as a chance to do structured reflection about how you've become the person you are today and about how you want to realize your goals for the future. And again, the byproduct is what you turn into us. But if you're not learning about yourself from writing these essays, I guarantee you we don't learn about you from reading them. So if you try to take shortcuts, you just rob yourself of an opportunity for growth. So put in the time. Think very carefully. What are we asking you? 2 broad questions. One about your past, one about your future. The first question about the past is connect the dots. We want you to tell us about the influences that have shaped you, the people, the events, the situations that have influenced who you are today. And you want to tell a story that only you can tell. And what makes it a story that only you can tell will not be the person or the event or the situation, but how that has shaped your perspective, your choices, your outlook as you've moved through life. And then a second essay focused on your future. That question is, tell us how your education at Stanford and your experience as a Knight-Hennessy scholar will help you to realize your intentions. And the implication here is that there is a gap between where you are today and where you aspire to go. And you're trying to bridge that gap through education, exposure, experiences, relationships you would get at Stanford. So I think of this essay as something you could write and tack up on the door of your dorm room, your hostel room, wherever you live. And every day it would be a reminder of why you're at Stanford, what you've come there to do. Because once you get to Stanford or any institution, you'll be overwhelmed by the number of choices that you have. It's really easy to drift into something that your friends are doing or that you hear about on campus. And so these essays are helpful because it's a chance for you to think very carefully about your own goals, about the right way to reach them, a way to keep yourself grounded once you get on campus. So 2 essay questions. There are also 3 short answer questions. These are just tactical questions. They give us a little bit of a different perspective on you. So we'll ask, for example, for 8 improbable facts about you. So 8 things about you that are true but are unlikely, right? So you get a chance to bring in different elements of your life, your experiences, your interests, etc. as you answer these short answer questions. And at this point, by October 10th, you can press submit. The application is done. Then what you'll see is a new section appears and it says, hey, now you may submit a video. The video is no more than 2 minutes in length. There is zero focus on production value. We don't care about backgrounds or special effects or what you're wearing or anything like that. The prompt is teach us something. So imagine that you were talking to your cohort of fellow Knight-Hennessy scholars and you have 2 minutes to teach us something. If we haven't constrained you, that means we've given you flexibility on purpose. Schools, not just Stanford, every admission office, we're very deliberate about words, about ways that we phrase questions. So if we say, teach us something, it doesn't mean teach us something academic. It doesn't mean teach us something personal. It doesn't mean teach us something of any specific adjective that we didn't put in that question. So it means you have lots of flexibility about whatever it is you'd like to share. Why do we ask for the video after you submitted the written application? We think it's really important to form our impressions without the kind of bias that can result from video. So we want to have an application, the written application only. We'll make our impressions based on that. You'll submit this video by December 11th. So almost more than 2 months after the application is due. December 11th is the day after the very last applications are due to graduate programs. And so we will look at these videos as we start to get feedback from your graduate programs on your graduate program applications, right? They're going to tell us this is one of the best students in sociology this year. We'll be looking at the videos at that point, but not earlier. Then with all this information, we come up with a short list of students whom we invite to Stanford for Immersion Weekend. Immersion Weekend will take place February 7th and 8th of 2020. It's at our expense. We'll take care of your airfare, get you from Chennai or wherever it is that you live to Stanford and back. We take care of lodging. Basically, if you get yourself to the airport, we got you from there, right? And so you come to Stanford, you spend a couple of days with us. We think of it as a preview of what your life would be like as a graduate student and as a scholar. So you'll spend some time with your graduate program, meeting students and faculty there. You'll spend a lot of time with us at the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program. We'll give you mini versions, micro versions of the things I talked about in the program. Having faculty come in from improv and do some exercises, some design school thinking, a lot of time to just get to meet the fellow scholars and see if this is a community where you would thrive. That notion of fit, that notion of understanding how you would contribute and grow and learn in a community is really important, and we want you to have a sense of that as you're going through the process. There's also, of course, an evaluation. So we have interviews that take place. Usually a panel of 3 or 4 will interview one scholar. One faculty member from your area or something adjacent. At least one of our leaders at Stanford, that could be a trustee, one of the university officers, someone like that. Often someone from the community. Maybe it's a patient from Stanford Hospital. Lots of different choices there. And then one scholar, a Knight-Hennessy scholar, but someone who is not in your field of study. So those folks get a chance to talk with you. A lot of questions about what you've done, what you learned about yourself from those experiences, no trick questions. And we try to then weave that information back into the application. Sometimes you're helping us by contributing new insights. Other times you reinforce the things we've seen. Other times it helps us to reinterpret what we've seen. But it's always helpful to have that additional insight. And then we reconnect with your graduate program. The reason we do that is that we can't select you as a Knight-Hennessy scholar unless you're being admitted to a graduate program. So we often get the question, what happens if I'm selected as a scholar but I don't get into my program? Can't happen. It's impossible. So before we invite applicants to immersion weekend, all the departments have told us this is a really strong applicant for my program. So in our first 2 years, between 83 and 90% of the attendees at immersion weekend ultimately were admitted to Stanford. Right? You can take it as a positive sign from your academic program, not a guarantee, but a positive sign from your academic program that you're a really compelling candidate. And then of those who are admitted to Stanford, usually between half and 2/3 get the chance to come as Knight-Hennessy scholars. And we'd be able to tell you that within roughly a week after immersion weekend wraps up. So, so that's it, and we'll have some time for questions. Oh, thank you so much.
And thank you for that wonderful presentation. We have, of course, a large audience here in-house in the American Center. We also have audiences joining us live on the Facebook and YouTube page of the U.S. Consulate General Chennai. And we also have audiences asking us questions on WhatsApp.
Ah, okay.
So what we're going to do is we're going to first take maybe 4 questions from the in-house audience. We will then take maybe 4 questions from our WhatsApp audience, and then another 4 questions from our Facebook and YouTube audience. If there is time after that, then we will probably just distribute it evenly as best as we can between all the audiences who have joined us for this session. All right. So thank you again, Dr. Bolton. It was a wonderful presentation, and gives us an insight into the depth that the committee goes into when they're looking for the Knight-Hennessy scholars, right? Absolutely. And just to reiterate what Dr. Bolton said, you have to be admitted to Stanford, to any particular department in Stanford before you can be accepted to the scholars program, in case anybody missed that. All right, so we'll take the first question. I'll ask you to raise your hand, and I'll call out and ask you to ask the question. And for the benefit of the online audience, Dr. Bolton or I will repeat the question. I think I will do that because you have a bad throat already. So I shall help you out by repeating the question from the in-house audience for those who are watching online. All right. So the first question, who wants to go? Yes, please.
So I'm curious, of the first cohort of scholars, what have students most enjoyed or most valued in their experience this far?
Okay. Can I just repeat that question? The question was, from the first cohort, what is it that the students have mostly valued or enjoyed about being part of the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program?
Yeah, and the answer is they're fellow scholars, without question. When we survey Stanford graduate students, the #1 request of Stanford graduate students, not Knight-Hennessy scholars, but across the entire university, is more opportunities to connect with students outside my discipline. And the Knight-Hennessy scholars have a ready-made interdisciplinary community, multidisciplinary opportunities by virtue of the social activities, the programming that they have together. So the scholars just love basically spending time together. They came back from Costa Rica just like all in love with each other because they spent so much time together answering all these questions about each other, and so that's by far their favorite thing. Second, what I hear is one of the things I mentioned earlier, which is this chance to learn about the problems they care about, the things they're committed to, from different lenses, different perspectives. So one of our students last night in Mumbai actually is from Chennai, and he is a PhD student in education. He has one advisor in the School of Education, he has one advisor in the Department of Computer Science, and a third advisor in the Communication Department. So 3 different schools: education, humanities and sciences, engineering. And for him, that chance to bring all those perspectives together in his graduate program is because his interest is, virtual reality, using that as a way to expand access to education. But then he said, I never thought I would have students from law and business and medicine, all these different perspectives with the same commitment that I have, so being able to learn from them. Yeah.
I think one thing that you're saying today is reiterating something that my colleague Shanti Mohan, the Education USA advisor, has been talking a lot recently, has been about the interdisciplinary nature of education itself.
Yes.
You just are no longer in isolation an engineer or a doctor or a legal specialist or even a teacher. You have to be looking at all other fields of study because it's all integrated these days, right?
And even if you want to be a specialist,
absolutely,
the best specialist understands how that specialization fits into other issues.
Yeah. And I think you can't be really a scientist in isolation. If you're talking about solving problems of humanity, you probably need to understand sociology, anthropology, history, and sciences as well, right? So you can't really work in isolation these days. Thank you so much for that insight, Dr. Bolton. We'll take the second question.
I just came off a summer school program run by International Management, Udaipur and Duke.
Sorry, I missed the. I missed what you said. You just came off a summer program run by
Duke.
By the Indian Institute of Management and Duke.
Yep.
And that involved a multicultural community as well.
Sure.
My question is smoothly transitioning from the previous question that we had. It is regarding the joint degree programs that is being offered at Stanford. So if I'm applying to one of those joint degree programs, how does the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program associate itself with that?
Yeah.
So the question is, if a student is applying for a joint degree program at Stanford University, how does that work with the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program, right?
Yeah, so first of all, I am a joint degree student, and like most Stanford students, I came to Stanford pursuing one degree and left with two, because you get exposure to things once you get at the university that help to spark your interest, and it's a university that really does encourage that kind of thinking. We love joint degree and dual degree students in the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program. You have to look very carefully at the requirements. Sometimes there's just one application. Do you know what joint degree you're thinking about?
I'm looking at two joint degrees right now. One is a Management Science and Engineering PhD combined with a Master's in Public Policy, or a Master's in Business Administration combined with a MBA.
Public policy.
Okay, so he said two possible combinations. One was a PhD in Management Science and Engineering with Public Policy. The other is an MBA in Public Policy. Those, by the way, are totally different paths, so you're going to have to figure that out.
Yeah.
But for example, in that case, the MBA in Public Policy, there's just one application. You apply to the MBA program, you check a box in that application, they will then send it over to the Public Policy Department. If you're admitted to those two programs, you're welcome to pursue those as a Knight-Hennessy Scholar. For the other option, Management Science and Engineering and Public Policy, you actually cannot apply to those two at one time. So you may only apply to one graduate program at Stanford in an academic year, but you always may add a professional degree. So business, law, or medicine you can combine with the other programs. Those are, again, engineering, earth sciences, humanities and sciences, education. But within the academic programs, you only may pursue one. So in your case, you might come as a PhD student in management science and engineering, and then add the public policy degree during your first or second year of study. And again, that is very common. That's actually how most Stanford students add their joint degrees. It's once they get to the university. You just have to get prior approval from the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program if you want us to fund it. If you don't want us to fund it, you're welcome to do whatever you'd like. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Bolton. Yes, please.
I was wondering if there is any restriction if you're a member of multiple living learning communities like the Knight-Hennessy, because this is just for me specifically, but there's a global law program that I was hoping to be a part of. So I was wondering if it's exclusionary, you could only be in one.
Okay, so the student's question is if there is any exclusion in terms of the programs that you can be part of. I mean, she's looking to, I think, be part of the law program, law school program, a global law program, and she was wondering if there is any restrictions in that particular program, and also being a Knight-Hennessy scholar. Right?
That's a really quick answer. Nope. Yeah. So there are different scholarship opportunities in other communities at Stanford. Some of those have restrictions as to what you can combine. If there's funding that comes along with the programmatic living learning element, then there may be restrictions. But if there's an academic program you want to pursue at Stanford, Knight-Hennessy Scholars would absolutely never stand in your way for that. We have a student in our first cohort who is a biologist. She's a marine biologist, and so she will spend time away from Stanford, right? We're near an ocean, but we're not on the ocean, so she'll be away. Anthropology students always have to do field work. So yeah, we understand that's part of your academic program.
There's a question at the back.
Hi.
Thanks a lot for the wonderful session. I'm planning to do an LLM program. So
LLM.
I understand that Knight-Hennessy scholars they usually come up with 3 years of education, whereas an LLM program is just 1 year. Does it really affect? Do you look at people who pursue 3 years more than 1?
All right. So the question was that the student is looking to apply for the LLM program, which is only for 1 year at most US universities. Now she is wondering if she applies for a program that the duration for which is only 1 year, will it affect her chances of getting funding, given that the Knight-Hennessy Scholars funds at least a minimum of 3 years, right?
So we fund a maximum of 3 years. So if you want to pursue a 1 year or 2 year program, it's whatever the duration of your program is. The one caveat here is that, remember, we don't have first claim on your time. You're at Stanford not to be a Knight-Hennessy scholar, but to be a student in your program. We are 4, 5, 8 hours a week on average. And so if you're only at Stanford for 1 year, you won't have enough time to cement the relationships, to build the community, to take advantage of the trips, for example, that I mentioned, right? You can't do those all in 1 year. So we do like to see students who will be at Stanford at least a couple of years. If there's, for example, a master's versus PhD, we might lean toward the PhD. For LLM, for advanced degrees in law, there's not kind of an equivalent. But what you might find is that once you're in the LLM, you decide, I'd like to add a degree in policy, or there's another, there's a JSD, the spills. There are a lot of different advanced degree options at Stanford Law, and you might decide, I'd like to add something else once I get to Stanford. Again, you can be funded for up to 3 years, as long as you get approval in doing that.
Sorry, we'll have to move on to the other. I've given you an opportunity, so we'll take some questions from the WhatsApp group now.
By the way, you're so advanced on technology. We don't have an app. We don't have WhatsApp. Like, I feel so behind. We're in the middle of Silicon Valley, but we're slacking here, so sorry.
Okay, so the question is, this is from an audience member who's texted us on WhatsApp. I'd like to know if there would be exposure to people in such intersection fields who can probably guide us.
Attention on the Consulate. This is fire alarm test. I repeat, this is only a fire alarm test.
Okay, sorry, just hold
no action
on.
is required. Thank you.
Sorry, we just have an announcement in progress. Kindly hold on. Please don't panic. This is just a test. Please hold on. Also for our online audience, kindly be patient. There'll be a small break for a few minutes because there's an announcement happening. So kindly just bear with us. We will continue shortly.
And maybe mute your speakers if they're going to be alarms.
Yes.
Yeah. So in the interim, do you want to yell out, what was your follow-up?
No.
Is that
So
okay?
I understand that, once I get there, I might, look at more programs that interest me and extend my study. But when I'm applying just for an LLM, does that affect the Knight-Hennessy consideration?
When you're applying for the LM, does that affect Knight-Hennessy consideration? No. Your talk was so good. When you were answering those questions, it was like, that was really terrific. It makes me really proud.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's very kind of you.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll just continue. Sorry for that slight short break. So the question is, if there would be exposure to people from interdisciplinary fields who could guide the student to pursue his interests in those particular fields. So would the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program offer that opportunity? I'm assuming the student joined late and perhaps missed your question.
Would you repeat that
Whether the
one more
student
time?
will have opportunity to interact with people from multidisciplinary fields, and would they be willing to guide the student to pursue his interests or her interests in those fields?
Yeah, and I think multidisciplinary education is a hallmark of Stanford University. It's something we believe deeply in. Actually, it was like John Hennessy's primary legacy as president of the university was this ability to enhance collaboration.
Just hold on, sorry about that. Sorry about that.
a long
we've
bell.
informed them, but I don't know. Show you the next question. If students can reapply in the following year if they fail to qualify either for the Knight-Hennessy or the academic, so I'll call out that question.
Gosh, that's a long bell.
in case you need some more water.
Thank you.
Very, very sorry for that interruption. We will resume now, and I will read out the next question that's come to us over WhatsApp.
But we were testing your dedication, so
Right.
that's what we were doing here.
Thank you, and sorry for that interruption again.
One last point on the previous
Yes.
question. Don't forget you're in a graduate program at Stanford. So a lot of the resources you need related to your program will come from the graduate program itself. Knight-Hennessy doesn't duplicate resources that your graduate program offers. We're trying to add value to your experience at Stanford. So if there's something that really relates to your specific field of interest, probably the first resource for that would be the graduate program.
Thank you, Dr. Bolton.
Yep.
So the next question from our WhatsApp viewer, audience member is, I wanted to ask if students can reapply in the following year if they fail to qualify either for the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program or for admission to an academic program in any department at Stanford University.
Well, yes, but I mean, you should go into it with the mindset that you're going to get it, right? I think that sense of optimism makes a difference. And, I'm just going to say a second, I know when you go through a process like this, it's really easy to kind of lose faith in yourself. You start to compare yourself to people around you, and her GRE score was 10 points higher than mine, and his marks were a little bit better, or she got promoted earlier than I did, or, he had 2 publications and I had 1. Don't beat yourself up as you go through the process. It's a process that's focused on your strengths. Right? So when we read applications, the person reading your application is on your side, right? The person reading your application's entire job is to make a case for why you'd be a great Knight-Hennessy scholar, why you'd be a great student in psychology at Stanford, whatever the program is. And so that sense of optimism, it's part of Stanford's character, maybe because it's in California and it's sunny and warm all the time, but that is very much the way that we read applications. So I think you'll do a better job on your application if you go into it with the mindset that this is something I can earn. This is something that would be a great fit for me. Now that said, if you're not selected, of course you're welcome to reapply. We have only been around for 2 years, so we don't have a lot of data on reapplicants, but I used to run admission for the business school. I did that for about 15 years, and so I have a good sense across graduate programs at Stanford. And reapplicants are admitted at a higher rate than first-time applicants, not as a policy, but just because if you're doing something for the second time, you have so much of a better base. You have better exposure. You've had more time to think carefully. And so in the event you're not selected as a scholar, you'd be welcome to reapply. If you're not admitted to your graduate program at Stanford, you'd be welcome to reapply, of course, subject to eligibility requirements.
There's a question from a member who's watching the webinar, our online viewing. She says she graduated in 2010, whereas you specifically mentioned that you need to have graduated in 2014 or later.
Yeah.
Is there any merit in appealing to the Knight-Hennessy Scholars
No.
Committee to consider her application?
No, because we're not going to make one restriction for applying and then not follow that restriction, right? It's a remarkably open program by design. If you look at most other fellowships, they have age requirements, or they have certain fields or certain countries or districts or allocations or something like that. Knight-Hennessy is really open to the world. Again, it's that kind of embrace that you kind of find at Stanford. And so we try to think carefully, because our scholars are coming from all around the world, all different programs, varying durations. Is there something we could hold constant that might help in forming community and cementing those relationships? And we said, let's start with years since undergrad degree. But you could work in the military for 20 years and then go to college, right, and still be eligible. So it's not focused on age, it's focused on your kind of educational experience. We wouldn't want to hold field of study constant. You wouldn't want to hold citizenship or anything like that constant. You want to maximize diversity there. But we thought this was one area that we might hold constant that could help to ensure that the community is thriving. So we'll reevaluate that at the end of every cycle, just like we do with every policy. So when we started the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program, the requirement was apply within 4 years, right? And then we expanded it to 4 years with a 2-year exception for military, because they have longer service obligations in the US and can't separate. And then we switched it to 5 years for everybody and 7 years for US military. So, we do evaluate the policy every year, but you won't get an exception to the policies that are stated.
Now I move on to questions from audiences watching us live on Facebook. There is a student who would like to know, to be eligible for the scholarship, should we also be applying for a full-time course? Should we be admitted to a full-time program?
Yes, and Stanford basically only offers full-time programs. The only exception to that, I mean, in the School of Engineering, there's something called the Honors Cooperative Program where there are a few degrees that you can pursue concurrently while you're working. Those aren't a good fit for the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program, right? This is a community of graduate students. If you're full-time working away from campus, even part-time working away from campus, you're not a full-time student at Stanford. And it's really hard to be doing good work in two different spheres, and that's why Stanford's fairly narrow in terms of the programs that we offer. So Knight-Hennessy scholars have to be in full-time degrees.
We have a question from an audience member watching us on YouTube saying that,
Wow.
Does this scholars program only concentrate on leadership and relationships?
As opposed to...
I think he was looking at it as an,
Yeah,
is
I
it
mean,
really
sort of.
academic and
Yeah.
is that also part
Again,
of
so
it?
think about the question, how do we add value to your Stanford experience? Your academic experience is going to come from the program, right? The specialization in that field. Now, we do have academic components, but they're focused on breadth. So they will complement the depth that you're getting in your academic program by giving you exposure to other academic fields. And then it really is about self-awareness. It is about kind of opening yourself to being vulnerable with your fellow classmates as you build relationships, opening yourself to new places in the world, new parts of the US, things like that. So, yeah.
We have another student writing to us from the YouTube live presentation. He would like to know, can you please share a couple of outcomes from the first cohort batch of Knight-Hennessy scholars?
I mean, they've been there 1 year. Nobody's graduated
Yet.
Right. So no. But if you're curious, you can go to our website, which is kh.stanford.edu. On the left-hand side, there's a section called Program. Go to Program and scroll down. There's a section that says Meet the Scholars. Every one of our scholars is listed on the site. The 51 scholars from the first cohort, the 68 scholars from the second cohort, and you're welcome to look at their backgrounds and their experiences. Those don't tell you why we love them, right? The profiles that are on the public website just kind of say some of the things they've done. But it's not why we selected them to be scholars. That's really not information we could share externally. But if you're curious about the intakes, not the outcomes, they're in their first year of graduate study, right? But if you're curious about the input, then you could certainly look at those profiles.
All right, so another question from our WhatsApp audience member is, I would like to do the MBA program, but my academic background is not very strong, though I have very relevant and good work experience. So what would be my chances of getting this funding?
Can't tell you. The true answer to any difficult admission question is it depends. There will be two students who have similar stories to what you've told me who have different outcomes, because it'll depend on what the work experience has been, what your academic challenges were related to. All these programs are at a university, and so they all are academic programs, right? The MBA program is at the Graduate School of Business. Our faculty always joke, like, school is the key word there. And so you are committing to an academic experience, and so I think you want to be able to make a case for why you would thrive in that academic environment. And it may be, by the way, that you're coming to Stanford with something to prove, because you didn't do as well as an undergraduate. But for another student, that wouldn't be the case. So I think you'll have to make sure that comes through clearly in your application, in your recommendations. And again, remembering that they'll be reading your application looking for strengths. What then are the reasons to admit you to the MBA program? Again, for Knight-Hennessy scholars, we're not an academic program. So we are going to focus on the three qualities I mentioned earlier. And you certainly might be able to demonstrate those even if you didn't have the strongest academic record.
All right, so we'll now take the final 4 questions from our in-house audience. I think Dr. Bolton has been very kind enough to talk beyond his given hour.
Oh, yeah.
And he's also having a bad throat, so let's not strain that too much. Final 4 questions, somebody who has not asked a question before, from the in-house audience, please. Anybody? That side, anyone? Yes, please. Go ahead.
Admitted into some other university, can a transfer student apply for the same program?
Good. So the question is, if a transfer student is applying to Stanford University, will he or she also be eligible to apply for the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program?
Sure, as long as you're applying to a program at Stanford and you'd be enrolling, you're eligible. Now, Stanford, to my knowledge, does not offer transfers at the graduate level. So even if you're in another graduate program, you would either be putting that on hold and coming to Stanford, or you'd end that program and come to Stanford, but they will not, to my knowledge, give you credit for coursework or experiences at another university to apply to your graduate experience at Stanford.
Next question, please.
Is there any remarkable experience that you can share from an earth science or energy background student that you know?
The question was, can you share any information about a scholar who is from the earth science or the energy background, basically?
Sure, and I'll give you the same answer, which is you're welcome to look at those profiles on the website. We do have students. Earth Sciences is a small school, as is education, so there are fewer scholars in those areas. That will change, as we expand the cohort. But there's a PhD student in the first cohort in the interdisciplinary program in environment and resources who's just terrific. Again, I mentioned we have a student who's a biologist, but marine biology, so there's actually quite a bit of overlap there. There's another student who's doing a joint degree, I believe, with the law school and a Master's of Science in Environment and Resources. We have students coming in the new cohort who are also in earth sciences. So just look at some of those profiles, and I think you'll get a sense of what they're doing. What are you trying to figure out, though? What are you trying to figure out?
I studied petroleum engineering, so I just want to know what kind of experience and how is their experience out there.
So she studied petroleum engineering, is trying to figure out how their experiences look. But remember, your story is your story.
Exactly.
And so I actually think, I had a real debate. I got overruled on this. I actually didn't think we should put profiles up on the website at all, because I think they're really dangerous for you guys. Because you look at them and then you say, okay, I need to do these 3 things. Check this box, check this box, check this box. And again, the things that are on the website are not the reasons we admitted them, not the reasons we selected them. It's just some information we can provide publicly. So I think you look inside. That's how you're going to prepare the strongest application. That's how you get admitted to Stanford, selected for the program, by doing that kind of reflection. And don't worry about other people. Don't worry about their profiles or backgrounds or experiences. But think carefully about why you want to go to Stanford, why you would be a great addition to the community, and then that's how you'll do it best.
Any other questions? Otherwise, I have final 2 questions. Yes, please, go ahead.
So I was wondering if you could share any attention in the consulate. Attention.
Sorry,
in the
just hold your question.
This concludes this test, and please all allow us to feel after this. Thank you for your attention. தூதரக கவனத்திற்கு இந்த ஒத்திகை முடிவடைந்தது. இனிவரும் அலாரம் அனைத்தையும் உண்மையாக கருதவும். உங்கள் அனைவரின் ஒத்துழைப்பிற்கு நன்றி.
Sorry for that interruption and the announcement that sort of got us into a break. Yeah, please go ahead with your question.
My question was if you could share any example of a collaboration between students of the first and second cohort, which would not have been possible in the existing graduate programs that you're already
Great question.
So remember the second, sorry, would you
repeat.
Would you repeat? Sorry.
So very interesting question from a student in the audience here, asking if you can share examples of a collaboration between students from the first cohort and the second cohort of the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program, which otherwise might not have been possible given the fact that they might be from different departments at Stanford University, right?
Right. So remember, the second cohort has not set foot at Stanford yet, right? They arrive in September, so there's no interaction between the cohorts yet, except that they have kind of buddy colleagues across the groups. Within the first cohort, there's some interesting opportunities. There's a student who's earning an MBA and a master's degree in policy, and a student who's earning a PhD in material science, who have together decided to start an artificial intelligence training institute for Central Asia, the first one there. And that would not have happened had they not kind of been around Denninghouse. You hear conversations all the time. I was walking through Denninghouse a couple weeks back. They were talking about infrastructure. And one person was talking about it from the tax perspective. Another one was an engineer just talking about how you build. And so you get a chance to see these kinds of things happening all the time. The scholars, I remember the 3 criteria, right? The outthink, outwork, outcare. They've started a Slack channel that they call the Outthink Tank. And so they have all these ideas that they're working on together kind of across the scholar community. But remember, they've been there 9 months. And so ask yourself what you did in your first 9 months of college, right? So give them some time. And it really is more of our focus is not what they're doing at Stanford on these collaborations. That's happening through the program naturally, but it's what are they doing 20 or 30 years afterward? And that's really where we're more focused. So,
TGV sir, email those 2 PDFs separately now to you. So final 2 questions in which I'm going to be asking Dr. Bolton.
Okay.
My first question is there any particular major where you see most of the scholars coming from? Is there any one major that stands out as against the other? Just a curiosity, out of curiosity.
Yeah.
And my second question is how many students, international students from India, are part of the Knight-Hennessy Scholars Program from the first cohort as such?
Yeah. So now I'm going to forget your first question because
the first one
I'm
is
teasing.
the majors.
Yeah, there's no particular major. I mean, the scholars are in all 7 schools across Stanford, and as a result, they have quite a breadth of major.
Okay.
It's in the U.S. It's common for students to study something different as undergraduates from what they study at the graduate level. This is most common probably in the professional schools, less common in a doctoral program where you're probably at least adjacent to the fields you're pursuing. But in business, law, students may have studied anthropology. One of the students I was with yesterday in Chennai studied religious studies as an undergraduate, and she's pursuing a degree in policy and an MBA at Stanford. So there's quite a breadth there. On the side for India, I don't know. Well, first of all, again, the students are up on the site, but as I think, Adith, Aditya, Suhani, and then you have non-resident Indians, right, as well, like Natisha. They're probably in the range of 6, I would guess, out of 50.
All right.
But again, that maybe the next year it's 2, and the next year it's 15. It just kind of depends on who applies, and as we build a cohort, we're looking person by person.
Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation and for your patience in answering all our questions from the in-house audience and our online audience as well. Thank you so much for coming to the American Center. We really appreciate it.
It's a treat. Thank you all for being here, and thanks especially to the folks online.
Thank you so much to our online audience who have joined us. Our contact details are up here on screen. If you would like to know more about studying in the US, then please do reach out to us. Our email ID is chennai@educationusa.org. Thank you so much for joining us. In-house audience, kindly just wait. I have an announcement. Oh, sorry, I have an announcement for our online audience as well. Can I have that fair flyer, please? Yeah. All right, thank you. So just, I'd like to make an announcement. The Education USA centers in India are organizing the Study in the US Education USA University Fair. These fairs are being organized in 10 cities across India. Our center here is going to be hosting these fairs in the city of Chennai and in the city of Kochi. In Kochi, the fair is going to be at the Gateway Hotel Marine Drive, the Taj Hotel Marine Drive in Ernakulam. This fair is going to be on Friday, September 6th, and from 2:15 p.m. to 8 p.m. 23 US universities will be attending the fair in Kochi. And the fair in Chennai is going to happen on Saturday, September 7th. It's happening at the Hyatt Regency Hotel on Mount Road. It's also from 2:15 p.m. to 8 p.m. in the night. And we are expecting 42 US universities to attend the fair in Chennai. So here's an opportunity for students to attend the fair and have a one-on-one interaction with representatives of these different universities who are participating in this education fair. Entry is free. All are welcome. Students and parents are welcome. So please, you have to register for the fair. So please go to our usief.org.in website, or you may go to the educationusa.state.gov website, and information about the fairs, both the Kochi and Chennai fair as well as the fairs in other cities in India, are available on these 2 websites. Please find the registration link and register for the fair in advance. As I said, entry is free, but registration is mandatory. All right, so make sure you register and come for the fair. All right. And now just another quick announcement is that on the 29th of August, we are doing an information session here again at the American Center space at the US Consulate building in Chennai. This time the topic is going to be on undergraduate application websites as well as the financial aid forms that undergrad students have to apply for, have to fill out. So if you are a high school student looking to apply for a bachelor's degree in the US, then that session is for you. Please give us a call or check our website for more information on the upcoming sessions. And finally, to all of you who have joined us today, do check our calendar of events on the USIEF website as well as the educationusa.state.gov website. We will be having upcoming information sessions for undergraduate and graduate students. Please attend those sessions. There will be representatives like Dr. Bolton from US universities. He's from Stanford. We will have other university representatives as well as Education USA advisors who will be doing these presentations. So do attend them, and hopefully that will encourage you on your journey to studying at a US university. Thank you once again for joining us. And for those in-house, kindly please wait.